That means we are off, and I am here. You are here, so let's do it. Joining me today, again, the great David Rothkopf, who I had a very thought-provoking conversation with, as always, about his latest articles at the Daily Beast and more, including Elon Musk, the anti-Semite's visit to Israel. Well, a lot to say about that. If you want to skip ahead to my conversation with David Rothkopf after the news, it begins at 14 and a half minutes in. And don't forget, my conversation with Glenn Kirshner is posted up too. I caught up with him yesterday about the schedule and importance of all of the Trump trials, a real clearinghouse of a conversation. Definitely check that out with Glenn Kirshner. It is up and available wherever you get this podcast. I also posted a video of that one on YouTube, where he's massive, youtube.com/standupwithpete. All right, now it's time for headlines and notes. News and notes as read and told and produced by me, Pete Dominic. For you. Can't do it without your paid subscription, so sign up now. Hamas released 11 more hostages into Israel. In exchange, Israel released 33 Palestinians from prison. Both sides have agreed to extend the truce for 2 days and to continue the exchanges. Hamas is committed to releasing an additional 20 women and children, and if the pattern holds, Israel releases 3 times that number. The 4-day pause in fighting has permitted aid to Gaza to increase. Since the 21st of October, when the first aid trucks began to cross into Gaza, more than 2,000 trucks of aid assistance have gone in, not nearly enough. President Joe Biden issuing a statement: "I have remained deeply engaged over the last few days to ensure that this deal, brokered and sustained through extensive U.S. mediation and diplomacy, continue to deliver results." He noted that more than 50 hostages have been released, and the U.S. has led the humanitarian response in Gaza, building on years of work as the largest funder of humanitarian assistance for the Palestinian people. At the end of that statement, he said, "I'm not kidding around. We are. We give them the most money. No malarkey, friend." Okay, he didn't say that. But, well, we're going to have to do a lot more, it would seem. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on his way back to the region, I'm sure in hopes of keeping the peace a little longer. You know who else is there? Elon Musk, as I mentioned, went to Israel and got a tour of the site of where the terrorist attack was on the kibbutz by none other than Benjamin Netanyahu. We unpacked that with David Rothkopf, but pretty wild to see that an anti-Semite like Elon Musk, who's noted, I mean, he's outspoken, would then show up in Israel. Okay. I feel like there should be more of an outrage about that, and maybe there is, and I'm missing it. But all right, let's head up to one of my favorite places in the world, Vermont, and specifically Burlington, Vermont, where a 48-year-old man, a guy my age, was charged with the weekend shootings of 3 young men of Palestinian descent in Vermont. We learned more about him. He actually spent time in Syracuse, where I'm from, and had been living in Vermont and done several different jobs throughout his life. Still no idea of a motive, but they're starting to unpack his hard drives, and he does seem to be a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but I'm sure we'll learn a lot more in the next 24, 48 hours about this guy whose name I won't say. But he's another one of those guys that if you're a black or brown person and you saw him stumbling around at night, you might be like, I think I'll go to the other sidewalk. This guy looks like he might be carrying a gun. I want to just kill anyone. I mean, it's not fair at all to hobo-looking, middle-aged white folks like me, but hey, I'm just saying. And can kind of joke about it because nobody was killed in this horrible shooting, which the feds now are looking into as a potential hate crime. But that's all I've got for you on that at the moment. Arguments were heard at the Supreme Court. I'm going to be talking with Eric Siegel today about that and more. Over drug offenses triggering mandatory 15-year sentences, most of the justices seem to agree on a middle ground, which would be really good progress, not enough. On a single day, 2 men were cleared in decades-old murders in Manhattan. Always want to read when there are exonerations like this. I should probably always mention them. The killings happened 8 blocks apart within 9 months near the height of New York City's crack wars in a Harlem precinct that was becoming synonymous with police corruption. As of Monday, the 2 otherwise unrelated murder cases have something else in common. The men who were convicted were exonerated at a Manhattan courthouse. They are the latest in a long string of New Yorkers, overwhelmingly black and Hispanic, who have had their names cleared after decades in prison. Jabbar Walker, 49, was convicted of shooting two men in a parked car in 1995, remained incarcerated even though a man who had testified that he had heard Mr. Walker confess recanted in an affidavit. The other, Wayne Gardine, also 49, was convicted in a case where the only evidence against him was the word of a drug dealer who changed his story several times, described the killer as 6 feet tall when Mr. Gardine is only 5'8" and known for providing police information in attempts to get his own criminal cases minimized. Wow. These two guys spent 20 years in prison, and it was as a result of potential police corruption. Hard not to be absolutely outraged after reading those stories and hearing about it. The two men's cases were taken up by the Legal Aid Society's Wrongful Conviction Unit and the Innocence Project, which I am happy to give shout-outs to. Since 1989, at least 115 murder convictions in New York City alone have been overturned. A substantial portion of the nearly 1,300 overturned nationwide, according to the National Registry of Exonerations. So I think that is pretty good. Bad news, bad news, I guess. But great organizations working on getting innocent people out of jail. Also wanted to mention, speaking of good news, yesterday the Biden administration announced nearly 30 new actions to strengthen the country's supply chains, both because smoother supply chains should reduce consumer prices and because stronger supply chains should ensure that the U.S. doesn't fall short of critical supplies such as medicines. This is exactly, I think, what you want a presidential administration or a government to do post a pandemic like we went through, and the shortages and the fear around them, and obviously the price gouging. Heather Cox Richardson, the great historian and Substacker, who is probably the most popular out there for good reason, wrote extensively about this in her newsletter. And since I'm posting the show in the morning, I can read a little bit from it, because she says back in February of 2021, about a month after Joe Biden took office, he established a task force across more than a dozen departments and agencies to figure out where supply chains were vulnerable. So after the research and analysis, as well as input from industry leaders, experts, and the public, the task force issued a 250-page report in June 2021. How about that? Well, now their recommendations, along with investments in key industries such as semiconductors and infrastructure, help to untangle the supply chains that remain snarled through 2021. You know, those 100 cargo ships waiting to dock in fall 2021. Now, 2 years later, there are fewer than 10. From October 2021 to October 2023, supply chain pressure, which is tracked by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, fell from near record highs to a record low. That, in turn, has helped lower inflation. Now, this White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience is what it's called, is expected to make those supply chains stay strong. And the president's going to use the National Defense Production Act. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is going to invest $200 million to strengthen domestic food supply chains. And the country, of course, working with other countries on the issue. 2 weeks ago, President Biden signed a supply chain agreement with 13 countries in the Indo-Pacific that he said will enable the countries to identify supply chain bottlenecks, quote, before they become the kind of full-scale disruptions we saw during the pandemic. And then he said, I'm not kidding around, no malarkey. Okay, that is a little bit of, I think, really important good news, which is why Heather Cox Richardson focused so much on it from her Letters from American Substack, as well as hopefully other news outlets, though I hadn't really heard that much about this big announcement from the Biden administration. Supply Chain Resilience Task Force, not exactly the story that Lester Holt led with, though maybe it should be, right? It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Not kidding around. Another story getting a tremendous amount of attention yesterday is that former disgraced president, now indicted 4 times, twice impeached, Donald Trump, is playing hard to his base, promising over the weekend that he is seriously looking at an alternative to the Affordable Care Act. Don't like it because it's called Obamacare. That's what they call it. I didn't call it that. That's what they call it. That's why it has to die. He suggested that the law should be overturned. The rumor or the thought behind his out of nowhere wanting to cancel Obamacare, even though he couldn't do it with both houses of Congress. He had both the Senate and the House, and they couldn't do it. But the thinking is that he apparently read some op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and that's what caused him to make comments about repealing the Affordable Care Act. Well, the Democratic National Committee chair, Jamie Harrison, noting on social media more than 40 million Americans depend on the Affordable Care Act for their health insurance, and the law also protects as many as 135 million Americans with pre-existing conditions from losing their health insurance, including me, not the pre-existing condition one, but my family is on the exchanges. Thank you very much. After losing my job at a big giant corporation and went out and wanted to do my own independent thing, how was I supposed to be able to afford it without the competition that these exchanges create? It's not great, but you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as Aaron Carroll taught us so many times. Anyway, Democrats are now going to shift their attention to those comments and the rest of the week and probably the rest of the campaign, because that's the kind of thing that motivates people to pay attention and obviously get out and vote. You know, health care that they want to keep. Looks like George Santos is going to be expelled from Congress as early as this week. I hope he keeps spilling tea and starts telling us who's doing drugs and getting drunk with lobbyists and all these things that he is saying. I don't care if they're true, because nothing that guy says is true, much less Republicans in the House that he knows about. All right, that's all the news I've got for you that I wanted to read here. How did you like that? That was 10 minutes of me mentioning, commenting, and reading some news. Was that, do you zone out? Do you take that all in? Do you appreciate it? Because I actually put a lot of work into it. Always looking for your feedback on how to make the show better, more interesting, informative, entertaining, and efficient to get you the news and information that you need to know or to understand. I mean, you don't need to know it. You should take breaks from it. Obviously, I've argued for that a lot, but I pay close attention to pull out the nuggets I think are most important to share with you. So let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right. Didn't get to audio clips today because I have a lot of other work around editing interviews that I'm doing, including going to be talking with the Third Way's Kate DeGrider today for the first time. Very excited about that. I've got Eric Siegel coming up. Should be posting that today or tomorrow as well. Always want to know who and what you want to hear from me on the program. New guests, old guests, reach out and let me know. Also, it looks like there is finally going to be a Stand Up with Pete Dominick gathering in Las Vegas, March 22nd, 23rd of this coming March, 2024, March 22nd and 23rd. A few of us working to make that come together, including Cassie in Las Vegas, along with Sheila, who is out there. And we're trying to put that together, but it's all happening fast. So I wanted to mention, if you want to meet other listeners, watch a taping of the podcast, performances by me and some of your greatest, favoriteest guests and listeners, then come out and meet us in Vegas, March 22nd and 23rd of next year. It's going to be a real hootenanny, a real party. Now, I've made no secret that I don't like Vegas very much, but when Cassie reached out and laid this whole plan out for me and made this offer, I realized that it was a really good opportunity. So it is not a done deal, but we're hopefully going to solidify it all in the next few days and weeks and be able to promote it much, much more. March 22nd, 23rd, 2024, Las Vegas, Nevada, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to see you there, but wait for the official announcement coming soon. All right, now let's get to my guest joining me today, David Rothkopf. Yesterday, he was on the program hosting an other guest. How about that? Something that's fun to try to do to promote each other's podcast. You may have heard yesterday's conversation with Mark Jacobson about Stanford from the Road to COP28 podcast, one of the many shows that his Deep State Radio Network produces, and you have to check out all the work that they're doing, the DSRnetwork.com. David Rothkopf is a regular columnist for The Daily Beast, where we talked about his articles today. He's a former government official. He worked in the Clinton administration, I think in the Department of Commerce. Yeah, he was Deputy Under Secretary of Commerce for International Trade Policy and Development. So he knows a lot of people, which is part of what contributes to his intelligence and the, I think, excellence of his work. He's got so many people that he can reach out to and experiences that he's had to write about and have credibility on. Of course, Rothkopf was the head of Foreign Policy magazine, the editor there for a while. He's the author of over 150 articles on international investment, economic, and policy themes, written for all the major news outlets. Go subscribe to Deep State Radio, get his book, American Resistance, follow him on all the social media, and listen to my conversation with David Rothkopf right now.
That sounds fun. I'm surprised that you don't have. I imagined you and your wife had a driver.
Did you imagine that?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be wrong. That would be incorrect.
Well, I have a whole bunch of notes, things to ask you about, but I wanted to start with what I just saw, this news that the great Elon Musk went to Israel to visit Netanyahu, and I can understand how they serve each other's interests and purposes, but it just seems like a lot of people are outraged across the world.
I'm one of them. I just wrote a column about it, which will be in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, tonight or tomorrow. But it's just horrible. What a horrible idea. You know, here's a guy who's an anti-Semite. He's not just an anti-Semite. He's taken the world's biggest social media platform for this kind of thing, and he's used it to promote and enable and amplify other anti-Semites and white supremacists and hateful people. And so that's bad. Right now, we're talking a lot about anti-Semitism. But for Bibi Netanyahu, if it serves him politically, he's willing to throw his entire country, the people he's supposed to offer a home and refuge to, Judaism and Jewish values, completely under the bus so that he can get a little bit of a political boost. And it, reminds me of, during the olden times when popes would be paid to offer absolution, indulgences. It's like Bibi's like, I will Jew wash you for X dollars. And, it doesn't have to be real dollars. It can just be the potential support of this guy with a big platform.
Yeah.
And he's done it before. Remember, Bibi met with Elon during the UN General Assembly meeting, and he's done it with other anti-Semites. Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, even the new big winner in the Dutch elections, Geert Wilders, who is a white supremacist. He and Bibi get along swimmingly. He kind of hates everybody, but Bibi is like, hey, scratch my political back and I will scratch yours.
How are anti-Semites good for the leader of the Jewish state to be meeting with? How does it benefit Bibi to be meeting?
It doesn't benefit him just because they're anti-Semites. It benefits him because they have something else to offer. They give him a little bit of a political boost, or they make him look like a statesman, or when the rest of the world is condemning him, they're not condemning him. And this is, you remember, Bibi came in 25 years ago, and his whole platform essentially was, I'm against peace. And so, a lot of people, including a lot of traditional supporters of Israel, were kind of like, oh, that's a bad platform. That includes the 80% of American Jews who support the Democratic Party. And so Bibi said, you know what? I'll just look for somebody else. And so he said, I'll take the Republican Party. I'll take MAGA. I'll take Trump. I'll take white evangelical Christians, as we've talked about before, who don't really wish any good to happen to the Jews. They're all here for their end times fun and games that don't turn out for the Jews.
The rapture extravaganza, which is not great for the Jews, but they're betting they have a similar bet, I guess.
No, rapture palooza is a bad thing for the Jews. And, he looks for somebody who will back him no matter what, even if it's the one group who should be most anathema. Now, there's a twist. And the twist is that, as he embraced that group, the other thing that he started to do is to accuse anybody who opposes him politically of being an anti-Semite. So if you use the word apartheid with regard to Israel, immediately he and his supporters, oh no, that's very anti-Semitic. Or if you say, I think other people may have a fair claim to some of that land there, or, that's anti-Semitic, because he places Zionism ahead of Judaism. Sick. To me, it's sick.
So Elon Musk goes to wherever he visited some kibbutz with Netanyahu. He showed him around where I think the attack on October 7th occurs, and they get this photo op, and somehow Netanyahu is still in power. Like, at no point is this guy ever going to fall out of power in the near future?
I think he may, but my friends who are Israelis will point out that the people in Netanyahu's coalition who would have to quit the coalition in order for it to fall apart and for there to have to be a vote are spineless.
Right. Well, what do you make of the recent events there? This hostage negotiations and releases and trades and the American role in it. Of course, you know all about this. And I think it's just interesting to see that Joe Biden might be more politically hurt by his unwillingness to engage in calls for a ceasefire than he's politically helped by the fact that he actually behind the scenes, he seemed to broker a ceasefire. I forget who said that. What do you think?
I don't know if that's even true. I do know this. Good for the hostages to be released. Good for there to be a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Good for there to be a flow of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza who desperately need it. Good for people to not be fighting and just sort of have a chance to clear their heads for a minute about what happens next and all of this. It is absolutely clear that Joe Biden and the administration played a central role in this. I think if left to his own devices, Bibi Netanyahu might not have done this. And Bibi Netanyahu said it was, the Biden administration that played a central role in all of this. So they deserve credit. There are people out there who are American, and many of whom are Muslim, who feel that the president's support for Israel was tantamount to Israel's onslaught against Gaza, supported it, made it possible. And you do see some people in social media and elsewhere saying, and therefore I will vote against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
This is ludicrous. They may feel that way now. First of all, it's a year away from the election. They'll probably feel differently come the election. But secondly, it's not that you're voting against Joe Biden. There are two people going to be in this race, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So what you're saying is you will not vote for Joe Biden and you vote for Donald Trump, the author of the Muslim ban, the guy who said he wants to bring the Muslim back bigger, better, and badder than ever, the guy who, if he were the president, would have said to Bibi Netanyahu, go in there, do twice as bad, don't show any, he would have been much worse. He wouldn't have been trying to restrain Israel. He wouldn't have been negotiating for hostages. He wouldn't have been doing anything positive here. He also would destroy democracy in the United States. And if you're an American and you're talking about your vote, you already obviously value your vote. And if you vote for Donald Trump, you're potentially saying I'll never get to vote again. So I don't know. I don't know if that argument stands right now. One of the people who talked about this on social media was MSNBC host Mehdi Hassan, who I have a lot of regard for. I think he's extremely smart and courageous and an excellent interviewer. And he said he had heard some of this from friends and relatives. And I posted something to the effect of what I just said. And he said, well, that may be so, but not right now. And I think that's right. I think, we're in the heat of the moment. And I think just let's see what happens over time. People get some perspective, and come next November, I think there won't be many people who say that. By the way, the total Muslim vote for Joe Biden last time around, I think it was 1% of his total vote. So, I don't minimize anything, but I'm saying it's not a major factor.
Right. People focus on like Michigan, where, certain states where the Arab Muslim vote.
Yeah. If Joe Biden were up against somebody else, it would be a bigger issue.
Yeah.
But he's up against the anathema of any thinking Muslim, right?
Yeah. You shared this on social media. Mark Elias's tweet. Let's be clear. A vote for no labels is a vote for Trump. A vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Trump. vote for Cornel West is a vote for Trump. A vote for Robert F. Kennedy is Robert Kennedy Jr. is a vote for Trump. Not voting is a vote for Trump. A vote for Biden and Democrats is a vote for democracy. Seems pretty straightforward.
Nothing could be more straightforward. It's the story of next year. Yeah. You just read that tweet every morning for the entire next 365 days. I think you'll be on message.
Yeah. Or you can vote for Donald Trump and never vote again. I think. Never
again. And, if you think voting's a big burden and you don't want your kids to have that burden or your grandchildren, it's annoying to go to the voting booth. It's annoying to hear all those political ads. It's annoying to have a choice. Then vote for Trump because you won't again.
I think the problem isn't voting. It's democracy is annoying. It's really hard to get things done this way. And I think people are fed up.
Yeah. So, look, if you don't like to, and apparently, because I see it on Twitter, they're like, and other forms of social media, and you talk to a lot of the MAGA, and they're like, yeah, well, we're not a democracy. We're a republic.
Right.
And we've talked about that before. That's just stupid. Right. But what they're also really saying is, I don't care. I don't want to be a democracy.
Yeah.
And it's like, really, you asshole? You don't want to be a democracy? Well, what do you want to? You're just going to go and take instructions from the next person who seizes the White House? I mean, really?
So often the kind of person that, just can't be told what to do by anyone ever, but would vote for someone who's going to tell everybody what to do.
Look, they're idiots. And you're not supposed to say they're deplorable. Hillary said it. She lost. And you're not supposed to say people who are racist and anti-democratic and anti-woman and anti-Muslim and anti-rule of law are jerks. They're jerks. Look, I mean, they're jerks. And they're, we know there are a lot of them because we went to high school, right?
Yeah.
What percentage of your high school class were jerks? A high percentage. That's how many are in the electorate. And that's what we have to live with.
How much do you worry? I'm going to be talking with this woman from The Third Way tomorrow. And I heard her just ravaging the no labels people, but talking about that they're the only ones that really can make a big difference because they can get their candidate on the ballot. Do you see them as the main threat to the outcome of the election?
No, I see them as a big threat.
I mean, in terms of an alternative to the two.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it depends. Remember what we saw in 2016. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Donald Trump won 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by 70,000 votes or something like that. And so, yes, third way can be on the ballot in a lot of states. But the reality is that the election in a lot of states isn't really going to, be where the rubber meets the road. It's going to meet the road in 6 states. And the question is who's on the ballot there and what affects the outcome in those 6 states. I wish that weren't the case. I wish there were no electoral college. If you can get that fixed, I'd be forever indebted to you. But the reality is there are candidates who could affect those outcomes who are not third way candidates. There are voting restrictions that could affect those outcomes that are a big deal. There are laws that over-empower partisan secretaries of state that could be a big deal. So third way is a big issue. It's a scam. It's incredibly dangerous.
What, no labels or third way?
No labels.
Yes.
Excuse me. No labels. Third way is excellent. I've known them for a long time, and I think very highly of them.
Good. So let's talk then about your recent pieces at the Daily Beast, including one recapping President Biden's meetings with the Chinese president, who he called a dictator. You talked about that in your piece. The title is Biden skillfully handled Xi Jinping's U.S. visit in ways Trump simply never could. You compared the way that Trump handled the leader of China versus how Biden did. And you reminded us of the relationship that Trump had with him and the policies. And they were so, as they were with many other countries, incoherent. One day he's the China virus. The next day he's his very good friend. Remind us a little bit of Trump's relationship and why it wasn't helping anybody, certainly not the American economy, the American worker necessarily. You could talk all about it.
Well, I mean, Trump yawed all over the pond on this one. At the beginning, he's like Xi Jinping, he's very powerful. He's a genius. He's, he tries to get a message to Xi Jinping, says, oh, don't worry, I won't criticize you on things like Hong Kong or the Uyghurs. I don't care about that stuff. He goes and he has some meeting with Xi Jinping, and, right before the meeting, Ivanka Trump, his daughter, gets a bunch of trademarks. In other words, the Chinese were just overtly paying off the Trump family. He was cool with that. And, he had one of those early meetings with Xi Jinping. They said, well, what was your takeaway from the meeting? And Trump said, we loved each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's deep. But of course, when you're a narcissist, that's all that matters, right? Is do you think the other person likes you? Periodically, he would lash out and he would say, well, we got to have a trade war, shut down those Chinese. And then he would do something, and all of a sudden, American farmers didn't have any place to sell their product. And he realized he'd have to go back to Iowa to get the nomination. And so he pulled back on that, and he wrote a bunch of big checks. He ended up having to essentially write a bunch of big checks to farmers saying, well, you lost that business to China, so I'll make up for it. And, by the end, around
welfare to farmers as a result of his fuck
Yeah,
up.
well, there's a long history of that in the United States. There's a long history of that in the world. Global agricultural policy is essentially welfare for farmers. But, then we had COVID, and he, of course, called it the China virus and a whole bunch of other, Kung flu and a whole bunch of other racist names.
Yeah.
And then, his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, went after the Chinese hard because of why? Because of big U.S. issues, because of rivalries, because the Chinese were tough on certain evangelical Christian groups that Mike Pompeo cared about. And so he sort of, took a stand.
I did not know that. I got to read up on that. I love Pompeo. Yeah. I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah, Pompeo is a really
nice guy, really good guy,
visionary, a great man, nice personality. But in any event, so Trump was, I love him. I'm a racist against them. I take gifts for my kids. I will, we won't be able to trade with them. I'll talk to them. I won't talk to them. And, so that would suggest to you that he would be very incoherent in his policy, which is the opposite of Biden's balanced policy. Now, you might say, well, Biden's tough on them, but he's talking to them. And that's true. And there's a really, really big difference between having a set of policies that are incoherently opposed to each other and having a set of policies that complement each other in order to achieve a long-term goal. That's what Biden has been doing. Most recently, by the way, Trump a couple of weeks ago couldn't remember who was Xi Jinping and who was Kim Jong-un. So, you could have had Trump hosting this meeting at one of his golf resorts, meeting Xi Jinping, calling him King Kim Jong-un, telling him he loves him, giving him a gift. You don't know, but it wouldn't have been good because Trump doesn't care about foreign policy, doesn't know anything about it, and is bad at it.
Well said. Very well said. It's a great piece. What do you think, if anything, the meetings, you had a great piece going into them. What do you think is the outcome, what was established at these meetings in California last week?
Well, the most important thing that was established was dialogue. Very important that the United States and China continue talking. Among the sort of concrete deliverables, the reestablishment of military communications is extremely important, as we saw during the incident with the Chinese spy balloon, because you need to be able to talk to your adversaries and say, this is not going to spin out of control. We are not going to go to war over this. We're, and which we did with the Soviets, by the way, and I think reestablishing that is important. They talked a lot about establishing cooperation and took some steps towards establishing cooperation and fighting the flow of fentanyl, a dangerous drug, into the U.S., the way fentanyl is made largely is precursor drugs from China are shipped to Mexico, combined to form fentanyl, and shipped into the U.S. And so with the U.S., the objective was combating the flows of fentanyl in. They talked about promoting people-to-people exchanges, which are good things, cultural diplomacy and stuff, which is what my wife does. And I'm obviously a big advocate for that kind of thing. They agreed to keep talking, and that'll mean more government-to-government discussions on a whole range of other issues, including some where cooperation is not going to be the outcome, like standing up to Chinese economic coercion, standing up to China as they flex their muscles in the South China Sea and around Taiwan, and so on.
It would seem like the way that the narrative, that the American narrative, the Biden administration narrative after was that, we can compete and not be enemies. And the Chinese narrative wasn't really about competition. It's like, we're getting along. We can work together. Do you think that that's a kind of fair conclusion of the different?
I think what the countries say publicly and what their real narrative is may sound different, but it's not. I think both countries view each other as rivals. Both countries see the relationship as being vitally important. Both countries have goals that they can't achieve without cooperating with one another. Both countries are wary of the other. And it's like, you have to take everything that's said publicly with a grain of salt. And the best example is this dictator comment by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Somebody said, is he still a dictator? Well, first of all, what's he supposed to answer to that? If he says no, then the press goes berserk saying Biden defends dictator Xi Jinping. If he says yes, then they're like, aha, he's saying Xi Jinping is a dictator, and that's undiplomatic. Well, look, I just think we need to take a deep breath. Xi Jinping knows he's a dictator. Xi Jinping has been a dictator for a long time. Xi Jinping has consolidated his power as a dictator. And while there are people around Xi Jinping who are paid to say, this is terrible, doesn't change the status quo a bit.
What do you think of, I'm listening to, and you generously allowed me to share this episode of Road to COP28, this series of podcasts that you have leading up to the UN climate conferences that start this week. And your guest, Mark Jacobson, talked about, the U.S. and China being both the leading polluters, emitters of greenhouse gases, but also leading innovators of clean energy. Of course, they are seemingly leading us in a lot of different ways. And when it does seem to come down to kind of profit and capitalism, if you will. And in America, we're having arguments over the future of energy. We have very powerful legacy dirty energy companies that have a seat at the table. In China, they seem to, while not care as much about pollution or climate change, they do want to make money off the future of renewable and clean energy. What do you make of the competition there and why we are having such a fight here at home over the future of electrifying our nation, where it would provide millions of jobs and would be also we'd be selling it to the rest of the world instead of China?
Well, look, China's environmental policies are pretty awful, and they, for economic reasons and others, want to continue burning coal and doing some things that are really, really bad for the environment. But they also had 1 million people die every year from pollution. And there was an imperative to find a way to control that. And they also want to compete. And that led them to invest in green energy technologies, wind and solar and so forth, and become a world-leading exporter of green energy technologies. Not because it was necessarily a public good. I think that was a nice to have for them, but because it was economical and it solved some of their market problems. So we've had some companies do that as well. We spend a lot of money in our country subsidizing fossil fuel industries because they're extremely powerful. They're in fact so powerful that they control one entire political party. as happens here in the United States. And that political party has therefore opposed itself to any kind of change that is actually good for the environment, like the electrification of vehicles, like rail transport, like not tearing up our, beautiful wilderness areas in search of certain, minerals or fossil fuels. And they, have never met a drilling site they didn't like. They've never met a pipeline they don't like,
right.
Because they feel if they lose one argument, they will start to lose all the arguments. And that's a problem here. It's not just in the U.S. One of their kind of main arguments that we live at the mercy of the world because, we need all this energy is also 40 years old, right? We're the world's largest energy producer. We produce and we also export more energy than any other country in the world. We are the superpower that we depend on these things. And I think, the episode of our series, The Road to COP28 that you referred to with Mark Jacobson, made a number of good points that, if we want to save the planet, then we have to stop producing fossil fuels. We have to stop using fossil fuels, period.
Right.
We have to move to renewable energy forms as rapidly as we can do so. And, we are getting there faster than we thought we would. I've been involved in this issue for decades. And, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody would have thought that we'd be on a path to the complete electrification of our vehicle fleet within the next 10 years or, the broad use of renewables that we've got. But we've got a long way to go. And the advantage of meetings like COP28 are that they bring the world together and they don't produce the progress that we want, but they produce some progress. They produce some progress on these issues. And most importantly, the conversation continues. The world has said, no, we're going to keep talking about this. And so even if it's not a perfect process, what it does do is it keep us periodically focused on these issues, as we must be, because, there's no plan B, right? There's no planet B.
What else do you want to say about COP28 or your podcast or anything else here to wrap it up that you want to mention?
Well, no, we've done this whole series where we've brought together 65 or 70 different experts to provide a wide range of views. And we did this in a way that was completely editorially independent. I didn't host it. We had experts come in to host it. We presented the discussions unedited. So you'll hear every view under the sun in this. And, our theory on this was that's really important because the issue is so important. Yeah. And I think that's one of our goals with all of the podcasts that we do at the DSR network. And we're planning to do more in the year ahead on things like artificial intelligence and other issues where it's really important that we have a well-rounded, well-informed debate. But also our various shows that we do, we do one on the intelligence community, one on foreign policy and national security, one on politics, one on law, one on defense and technology. We do regular ones on economics and climate and so forth. What we're trying to do is to have good, lively discussions in depth on big issues that go further than you'd get if you were listening to cable TV, which is exactly what you do here, Pete. And that's why we look up to you as our guru.
Do you think the Deep State Radio Network will soon make it to shed status?
Shed?
Where you'll be working out of a shed like me?
Oh, no, I don't think we'll ever be that large.
Okay. Well,
I mean, you've got infrastructure.
Something to.
We don't. Well, though we have passed 1 million downloads a month.
Wow.
Which is not zero. We do a lot of podcasts, so you can do the math. But the average listener, we just did a listener survey, and the average listener spends the whole time with each podcast, 99% or 98 something percent of each podcast, and the average one is 45 minutes. So what you get is a lot of bandwidth from a lot of smart people, and we're really, really lucky to have them.
The DSRnetwork.com, ladies and gentlemen. David Rothkopf, always a pleasure to have you here and to talk to you very soon again. Thank you so much for your time today, as always.
Thank you, sir. Same at you.
All right, David Rothkopf. Love that guy. Obviously, I have him on the show every other week or so, sometimes even more frequently. One of my favorite guests, writing all kinds of real good stuff over at the Daily Beast, which you should read and subscribe to. Also, his Twitter feed is still a great source for me. Not only his own thoughts, his own articles, but whoever's thoughts he's sharing on a broad range of issues. I really enjoy and get a lot from just clicking on his Twitter feed at DJ Rothkopf every day. All right. I'm now trying to get more and more active on Threads. I'm learning more about Threads. My friend JoJo from Jers says that's where it's at. She knows social media as well as anybody. So please follow me there on Threads. If you haven't, get on there and I'll follow you back, as well as TikTok and YouTube. I posted my conversation with Glenn Kirshner over there. So check that out as well. That's all I've got for you today, and I will be right back here tomorrow and promise to have the show up by midnight tonight. Sorry for the late posting, but thank you for your grace. John Carroll looks like he'll be in Vegas, I think. It's looking good. Take it away, brother.
You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.